don't know that anyone is ever ready for Richard Thorp, but you would put me after a cheerleader, a boring scientist. I've always tried to stay, I love technology. I kind of wallow in it. I'm told I have a knack for it. Be able to see something that's not obvious to other people, say, hey, why don't you do that? And they say, yeah, that won't work. And a couple days later, I come back and say, what did you say? And we're off on another track. Between 35 and 50 years ago, I just turned 70, by the way, I'm having trouble keeping ahead of the cutting edge of technology now. I sometimes get nipped by it. The young folks coming up are just so darn smart. But between 35 and 50 years ago, I did a lot of research in aerospace areas in support of the Gemini and Apollo missions. A lot of human factor studies for spaceflight, telemetric monitoring to know the physiological signs of the astronauts while they're in orbit to make sure they're healthy and doing okay. We actually made the first blood pressure remote operating cuff, which was a real innovation in those days. You can buy them for $30 at the drugstore today. And we did sensory deprivation studies and studies how people can work and perform in limited environments for long periods of time, such as on a space vehicle. We accidentally killed an adult male elephant with LSD. Elephant's name was Tusco, and I still feel very, very bad about that. It was a study in temporary insanity and rage. I come up with occasional off-the-wall ideas, such as one that eventually allowed the Saturn booster to carry the lunar rover, the electric car, and its bulk and its weight into orbit and eventually to the moon. I built solar homes for a while, and I heated and air conditioned the homes with the sun. And I did the photography for the Air Force Thunderbirds. And you know, quail cannot fly, but they fly very well. Their wing spread is not enough to support their body weight, but their entire body is an airfoil. They're what we call a lifting body. I used to freeze quail on different racks in different positions and study them in wind tunnels, and eventually the space shuttle can't have wings either because you can't blast it into space with wings big enough to hold it. And even if you did, they'd burn off on re-entry. So the space shuttle, mysteriously enough, is kind of shaped like a whale. I also did the photo instrumentation for the National Severe Storms Lab, the first storm chasers, if you would. I'm talking about the end of cancer as a deadly disease. I bring really good news to you today because there's a lot of good things going on. But 35 years ago, in the height of my work in aerospace and all sorts of other fun technologies, I had a life-changing experience. My wife died of breast cancer at age 27, an unheard of statistic. And in the 5 years we fought this ugly disease before her death, I started reading the research reports, the journals, looking where we were. And cancer research in those days was, I use one word to describe it, pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. It was self-serving, it was repetitious, and it was combative between the researchers. Frankly, we were getting nowhere. So anyway, I slowly shifted in a position, and now I find myself 35 years later as the principal of 2 different cancer research organizations. ILSbio has been around for 18 years, and we study cancer at the DNA level. We're located right here in Chestertown. We've been here for about 12 years. Before that, we were in Bethesda. We invite you all to come over anytime you'd like. You just call ahead and make sure the coffee pot's on, see what we do. Our lab, we employ MD pathologists, lab techs. We do all the neat things that you can do. We store our cancer specimens in minus 190 degrees centigrade liquid nitrogen. Basically stops all life, and they're as good 50 years from today as they are the day we put them into it. We do extractions of RNA, DNA, cDNA, and what have you, and we then study them on bioanalyzers, and we're able to determine where certain mutations are. What's the difference between the normal tissue from the patient and the diseased tissue? That's where the secrets lie. Now, we do a lot of work by maintaining a worldwide network of participating sites. I'll advise you not to look at the next 2 slides if you're a little bit squeamish, because cancer is a very ugly disease. But our sites are in Russia, in the former Russian Republic, Moldova, Kazakhstan, Republic of Georgia, and Ukraine. We also have them in Pakistan, Central America, South America, and Southeast Asia, along with about 50 sites in the United States. We use these to collect surgical specimens at the time of surgery. Close your eyes if you don't like gory things. Cancer is not a pretty disease. You start in with a cancer surgery thinking it's something very simple, and then you have to go deeper and deeper and deeper, and all too often, there's a point of no return. It's an awful disease. The gross specimens that come out, and gross is a pretty good word for them, but typically, they only take about 1 gram of tissue from this for patient care. The rest of it, they throw it in the trash. It's far too valuable to researchers at the genomic level to do that. So we've trained principal investigators at each of our sites to dissect the known cancer tissue from what we call normal adjacent tissue from a cancer specimen, and it's frozen in liquid nitrogen. The liquid nitrogen then is shipped to us, the shipments to us in these vapor shippers, which will hold their temperature at cryo temperatures for up to 4 weeks in transit. This is the end result, a highly qualified, characterized cancer specimen, and we distribute these and market these to biotech firms, pharmaceutical firms, universities, the government, worldwide. Decoding the human genome is probably the most important thing that humankind has ever done. It's more important than learning to fly or go to the moon. We're only now beginning to understand just how important this is. In the last 5 years, we've learned more about cancer and other diseases than we have since the beginning of time. And we're starting to see the results of this learning turning into real things. It's reducing the death threat of cancer. The National Cancer Institute had the Human Genome Project, where they were attempting to decode the human genome for the first time. A friend of mine, Dr. Francis Collins, is the man who headed that. His name will become as famous in the future as Thomas Edison and the Wright brothers and all those people, because what he is doing is far more significant in the impact it will have on us. He had a working draft of the genome in the year 2000, and by the year 2003, managed to sequence all 3 billion base pairs. But a lot of companies then suddenly got interested in this at the end of his research. He's clunking along in a well-equipped but government-type lab. And some very aggressive companies decided they wanted to beat him to decoding the genome. They wanted to patent it. And they wanted to license out little bits and pieces to researchers. That would have slowed it to the end. Fortunately, he beat them by about 10 days. And he placed it on the internet. So since that time, the amount of research and knowledge that's taken place in cancer has been astronomical. You just can't even keep up with it. Each cell in your body has 2 copies of your DNA, except for sperm cells and egg cells, for obvious reasons. And each of your DNA strands is a complete recipe book for building your particular body. It's made up of, in between the helix of the DNA, there's little ladders across it, and those little rungs in the ladders are made up of proteins. They're made up of 4 proteins only, T, C, G, and A, and please don't ask me to pronounce what they actually stand for. But these are assembled in little 3-letter words in each of these spokes of the helix. There's, if I read it to you, I couldn't do it, I'm too old. Because it would take 100 years to read one of those words per second. That's how complex your DNA is. When you look at the DNA, we look at it first from genetics. We want to see if you have any predispositions to disease. The most famous recently in the news is BRCA1, and of course BRCA2, breast cancer 1 and breast cancer 2 gene. If you're positive for breast cancer 1, then you have an 80% chance in your lifetime you're going to develop invasive breast cancer. If you're positive for BRCA1 and BRCA2, well, then your odds go down considerably. And people like, and if you're positive for either one of those, and you have a mother, a grandmother, or a sister that has had breast cancer, then I wouldn't want to make any bets at all on your possibilities of getting through life without developing it yourself. So people like Angelina Jolie make very difficult, awesome decisions to have a double prophylactic mastectomy. That's the choices we have today. But fortunately, this research is giving us very soon better choices. Genomics, the next thing we look at, that's looking at the DNA of the cancer itself. We compare the diseased tissue with the normal tissue, and then what we call normal for someone who does not have cancer from the same organ, and we start to find out the markers that exist that indicate the presence of that particular cancer, where the mutations are. Now the work is mostly at proteomics, which are the proteins that make up each part of the genome. We extract, we get the messenger RNA. I'm not going to go in details about what that is, but it's the word that passes on what the next cell is going to be. We have the disease from the disease cell, we get it from the normal adjacent, and we compare the two. The difference is what causes that cancer in that one person, in that one surgery, in the same organ. If we do 1,000 of those, we start to get a picture out what's common to that particular. And we can develop biomarkers. Biomarkers are here now, they're starting to work, they're starting to slowly find their way into medical practice. They're amazing. It works at the molecular level. They're very, very clear, simple tests, normally from a blood test. All these standard tests we currently use, like mammography and pap tests are history. They are absolutely no longer needed, yet our doctors continue to take these things and do these things. All these other methods of detecting cancer, digital rectal exams, goodbye. I'm happy to see that one go. A lot of guys around here. CA-125, the only chance you have to know if you have ovarian cancer or not, X-rays, PSA, biopsies. They're all being replaced with an annual trip to your doctor for a blood test. From the blood test, they'll make serum and plasma. They'll run it on a serum solution. We call it andalate solution. It'll be run on microarray slices, and under PCR, it will tell you if you have that cancer or not at a very, very early point. The current sensitivity of these biomarkers, in the laboratory situation, we can detect breast cancer 2 years before it can be detected as microcalcifications in mammography. Think of having your breast cancer detected 2 years before it ever forms a nodule. Breast cancer treatment in the future will be oral medication for 6 to 12 weeks. We'll run the biomarker test every 4 months for 2 years. If it stays negative, you're back to once a year. It was an inconvenience. It's not a life threat. Currently approved by the FDA is colorectal screening. I've had my last colonoscopy. This can detect the presence of the cancer up to 16 months before you can see the beginning of a polyp in a colonoscopy. It's much more accurate than a physician's eyes. Cervical cancer, now we can detect cervical cancer 10 years before you can see the cell damage of the disease on a pap smear. And we can treat it and cure it at that point once we get these things into common use. These are the last two, colorectal and cervical cancer, are currently FDA-approved tests that are available right now. Next time you have a pap smear, tell your OBGYN that you also want to have co-testing for HPV. It's paid for by your insurance now. This is the microarray, the first one that we ever made at ILSbio. This was made in June 2005 for Roche out of Germany. This has 96 cores in it of tissue of different breast cancer cases that we know the diagnosis of. And then these things are sliced on a microtome, so each slice we get and mount on a slide has that same representation of the 96 cases. An unknown andalate solution is placed on top of that. Under PCR, it's run, and it will tell you whether it matches or not. The ones that match will illuminate. So you not only know that someone has cancer like 2 years early, but you now know the exact type and what's the best medication you should be taking now. Don't wait till it's a bad disease. The timeline, genomic markers are working today in research settings. The first ones for cervical cancer and colorectal are currently FDA approved and available at your local doctor if you insist upon it. But you definitely have to insist upon it and maybe even educate them. And they will revolutionize medical practice. And the threat of death from cancer will begin to end. Within 10 years, cancer will no longer be a death threat, as long as we bring these things into our practice and we start to follow the protocols. And this is extremely very good news. I'm sorry, I'm running a little behind here on the magic man with the clock, so I'm going to go a little faster. I'm going to talk only about human papillomavirus and cervical cancer. Papillomavirus is the only cause of cervical cancer. If you don't have the virus, you will not have cervical cancer. So, keeping that in mind, we have this probe that will test for the presence of cervical cancer virus, HPV. If you have it, you need to do something about it. If you don't, sit back and relax. You have at least 10 years before you have to start worrying about it. The progress on cervical cancer, we have the first vaccine ever developed against cancer. People say, when are we going to get something out of this cancer research? There's a vaccine, listen, people, for cervical cancer. It's highly effective, it's extremely safe. But you have to give it to your children between about the ages of 10 and 14 before they become sexually active. There's also a molecular test, which is what we're using in a project in Vietnam. It's FDA approved by Roche. It's the first one, but there's a whole string of these that are coming down the line right now. So it's just a matter of time before there's even better ones. And we have an early stage cure for cervical cancer discovered at that point, which is cryotherapy. They simply freeze the cervix. It takes 6 minutes. They freeze it for 3 minutes, they wait 5 minutes, they freeze it for 3 more minutes. At that point, it kills the virus, and over 5 weeks, any damaged cells debride and slough off, and after that, you're set to go for another 10 years without worrying about it. In developing countries that can never have mammography and pap test and colonoscopy, the experts in place to do that, biomarker screening is available. It gives them earlier detection, more accurate, and it's affordable. Cervical cancer is the third most common cancer for women in the world. It's the third leading cause of cancer death for women in the world. There's 530,000 new cases each year and 275,000 deaths from cervical cancer in the world today. Now, I hate epidemiologists, and I really hate their statistics, because these are big numbers. But if one of those 275 is your wife, your mother, your sister, or your daughter, imagine the pain that death brings to your family. Now multiply that. I prefer to look at these statistics in a little more realistic way. A woman is newly diagnosed every minute with cervical cancer, and a woman dies every 2 minutes. So we have to do something about it. This is the human papillomavirus. It's so small we'll never see one. Only with an electron microscope can you see it. There's 106 different strains of human papillomavirus, but there's 2 on the left side, 16 and 18, that cause 75 to 80% of cervical cancers. So those are the ones you really get alerted about. Cervical cancer goes through a process. And from the time that, from this point when you're first infected, and we can detect this with this probe marker within probably 5 or 6 days after you're infected. Going to this point is probably 10 to 12 years. Pap smears can start to detect at this point, about the middle of this point, when you start seeing really damaged cells you can pick up. Once you're at this point, it's really bad news. Not many people survive from that point forward. The pilot project we're doing in Vietnam, we're partnered with many people. I'm going to run right through these. Man's flashing at me down here. But these are the people that we're working with in Vietnam to this project in Vietnam. Our U.S. partners includes Roche Molecular, which have, with a little arm twisting and convincing, they're donating 37,000 of their FDA-approved test kits. They're building 2 molecular laboratories in Vietnam, one in Hanoi, one in Ho Chi Minh City, equipping them with their COBAS real-time systems. Our other partners here in the U.S. are MD Anderson, Stanford University, Johns Hopkins, and the Gates Foundation, where we're waiting for supplemental funding, which we're really hopeful will come through shortly. The Vietnam project, we're going to screen 35,000 women between the age of 35 and 55. About 3,000 will test positive. Those that are positive for 16 and 18 will undergo a visual inspection of the cervix. If there's no contraindications, they will have cryotherapy, and then they'll repeat the HPV test in 1 year. Cryotherapy will cure most of these cases at that early stage. Those positive for any one of the other 12 HPV types will frequently be monitored to make sure it appears that if there's converting, that they then can go ahead and be treated. Upon completion of the project, the Ministry of Health has guaranteed that will increase the program to screen 2 million women per year which is a drop in the bucket considering they have 46 million women in Vietnam. But the cost of screening, less than $10 a test. If you have it in the US, it's going to cost you $50 to $150, but hey, it's worth it. And the accuracy is over 98%, where cervical cancer PAPS readings in the United States, which is one of the best ones, is at 61% accuracy right now. So cervical cancer today, we have the answers. We have a vaccine, but less than 6% of our children are being vaccinated with it. We have HPV molecular testing, which our doctors don't even know about yet. In fact, their big organizations are fighting it because it's a multi-billion-dollar business doing pap smears in this world today. And we have a cure at that early stage, which is simple cryotherapy and office procedure, rather than the more expensive surgeries that keep doctors in business. I don't mean to sound that way. There's many, many good doctors in the world. But today, there's no reason that any woman should die from cervical cancer. This is our group in Vietnam. My wife, Cindy, and Toneda, please stand up. I could not work without their support. And you notice Toneda down here loves to go to Vietnam. He's been on the ground for 5 minutes and he already has a new toy. By the way, the airport is an exact duplicate of BWI Airport. There's a long story about that, but not today. I've been working in Vietnam for almost 20 years. Many presentations. This is the Minister of Health of Vietnam. His daughter is attending Washington College right now. She'll maybe at the reception tonight. This is Dr. Phil Castle, who's the leading expert in the world on HPV and cervical cancer. He works for us right over here, 6 blocks from here. My son was drafted to sing in the opening ceremonies, "We Are the World, We Are the Children." They have all these flags arranged, but it just so happens the United States flag and the Vietnam flag are right next to each other. This is my wife, Cindy, and our facilitator, Hyen, in Hanoi, next to each other. And I look at that and I say, whatever political reason could justify a 35-year-long war in this country? We have to find a better way of treating disease and a better way of managing our government. Thank you. Read this, memorize it, and take it with you. It will save your life. If you're diagnosed with cancer, don't go to a local doctor for treatment. Not that they're not good people, but it takes a multidisciplinary approach. At MD Anderson Cancer Center, very few people die of cancer. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.